Off to Alaska. In 1925, 31-year-old Russell Merrill took off from the Willamette River near Portland, Oregon, to follow his dream of starting a flying service in Alaska. He flew a modified Curtiss F flying boat with 3 passengers and 60 pounds of gear. His wife Thyra waved goodbye from the shore, full of pride and anxiety as she watched the clumsy plane disappear into the sky, knowing it would travel thousands of miles, a terrible long way to get to Ketchikan, Alaska.
I was alone, suspended by nothing but air. It certainly is a funny feeling to know that your destiny rests completely with your own knowledge of the game.
Russell Merrill was the space astronaut of his day, flying over uncharted mountain ranges, large bodies of water, and vast expanses of tundra. He established commercial aviation in Anchorage the same year Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic. Born April 8, 1894 in Des Moines, Iowa, to a well-to-do, socially prominent family, he was an all-around student and athlete in high school. Merrill attended Grinnell College and Cornell University, only to have his studies interrupted by the onset of World War I in 1917. He enlisted to fly in the Navy just 6 months shy of a chemical engineering degree. Merrill graduated from ground school at Massachusetts Institute of Technology at the top of his class.
If you have ever enjoyed a scenic railway, you will be crazy about flying. We always expect the unexpected and are never disappointed.
Merrill had to try aerobatics while training in Key West, Florida.
Then zowie! The machine spun, and they don't spin slowly either. After spinning a couple of times, I came out and looped again, this time much better. By the time I'd reached, about 2,500 feet, I had spun 3 times and looped as many, and that last loop was a peach.
Russell Merrill was presented his gold wings as a Navy aviator on March 12, 1918. He was never sent overseas, but by the end of the war and his retirement from active duty, Merrill had been promoted to lieutenant junior grade and accumulated 376 hours of flight time. Merrill loved flying and wanted to get into aviation as a business, but after the war there were more pilots than jobs. So he joined the engineering department of Crown Willamette Paper Company, where he met a vivacious, high-spirited, blue-eyed blonde secretary named Thyra Allen, who shared Russell's love of life and adventure. They didn't waste any time getting married. In 1925, Merrill saw an advertisement in the paper of a flying boat for sale in Portland by Roy Davis, a pilot and mechanic. Davis told Merrill he wouldn't sell his plane if he could interest someone in starting an aviation business with him in Alaska. Merrill couldn't resist and signed on to fly miners and trappers in and out of southeast Alaska. Russell and Davis's first exploration flight in Alaska was to be a survey flight from Sitka to Seward. That flight would prove regular commercial flights were possible across a body of water other pilots considered to be the least predictable in the world.
I kept close to our compass course in spite of the constant losing and taking of altitude. We figured we must be drawing close to Yakutat, and we were so low on gas we had to put in our last can.
In dense fog, they refueled in midair with Davis climbing out of the open cockpit to reach the gas tank. The filler cap was on the top wing, and Davis found himself holding on for dear life with one hand while pouring gas in with the other. It was their first Alaskan adventure.
Luckily, the fog began to lift. We deviated surprisingly little from our set course, and we had made the halfway point.
Yakutat was not quite halfway to Seward, but they were over the worst part. Merrill and Davis later reached Seward's harbor in Resurrection Bay. Then they flew to Anchorage to earn money by taking people on rides. Then on to Kodiak and back again to the Kenai to fly over mountain peaks, fighting fog, and a 40-mile-an-hour wind. They were forced to land in rough waves after running out of gas. The plane was anchored, but the storm battered the plane to pieces. Russell Merrill and Roy Davis renamed their operation the Alaska, Oregon, Washington Airplane Company after losing their Curtiss flying boat. They carried mail and passengers between 7 canneries operating around Bristol Bay. A surplus Aeromarine 40B flying boat replaced the Curtiss. But it wasn't long before Davis decided he wanted to return to Portland. Merrill wanted to fly in Alaska, so they ended their partnership. Merrill chose to hire on with Anchorage's new airline company, Anchorage Air Transport, after the breakup of the partnership.
Guess you'd know that I'd rather fly in Alaska and live on beans than fly down there and own a Rolls Royce.
He flew the company's two new biplanes, the Travel Airs, Anchorage No. 1 and Anchorage No. 2, planes that could fly up to 142 miles per hour. Anchorage was known as the City of Hospitality, and it welcomed the Merrill family, which now included two little boys. The city's airport was a strip on the edge of the city on 9th Avenue, today known as the Park Strip. Flying in Alaska was thrilling and dangerous. The Anchorage No. 1 plane went down in a blizzard on a flight to Candle with Merrill at the controls. By the time he got it back to Anchorage, a journey that was only supposed to take a few hours had stretched into a month. In June, the second plane crashed on a trip to the Bristol Bay Canneries because of a gale wind. It took another month and a half to repair that plane. Anchorage was a difficult base to fly from, surrounded by vast towering mountains. On November 6, 1927, Merrill challenged the mountain barrier and flew a straight compass course over the mountains from Anchorage to Akiak. He discovered a new route through the Alaska Range, which became known as Merrill Pass. Now, flights across the Alaska Range from Anchorage to the Kuskokwim could be made in a day. Merrill also became the first pilot to fly over Mount Spur volcano, taking him to an altitude of 13,000 feet. In November of 1927, the first airplane hangar in Anchorage was built by Anchorage Air Transport. In the spring of 1928, Hollywood came calling, bringing the glamour and excitement of the movies and a big boost to the northern economy. The Fox Film Expedition was in Alaska to record scenes of Eskimo life. Wien Alaska Airways of Fairbanks offered Anchorage Air Transport half the work of ferrying the Fox crew from Fairbanks to Barrow. On May 1, 1928, Noel Wien in his Stinson Detroiter and Merrill in Anchorage No. 1 set off for Barrow with the film crew. Low clouds and fog forced them to land 4 hours out of Wiseman. The fog lifted the following day, allowing Wien with his larger tires to get airborne. Merrill, along with cameraman Charles Clark and guide Jack Robertson, waited for him to return from Barrow with shovels to dig a runway for his Anchorage 1. Bad weather continued for over a week, preventing Wien from returning. On May 22nd, Clark and Robertson set out to walk to Barrow. Merrill stayed with the plane. 2 days later, he decided to set off on foot.
Have enough cooked rice with me to last 4 days anyway. Hope to make it to Barrow or a native village, but rather doubt whether I can. Dearest love to my wife, boys, and 2 fine brothers. R.H. Merrill.
Wien took off with Virgil Hart as soon as the blizzard slackened. They had no landmarks to guide them, and every sign of life was buried under 2 feet of snow. That was 12 days since he had left Merrill. Clark and Robertson were found, exhausted and half-starved, 50 miles from Barrow. But there was no sign of Merrill. Dog teams dispatched from Barrow helped with the search. Meanwhile, Merrill stretched his rice with snow, drinking rice-flavored water, but hoarding the rice. He came across lemmings after several days of walking toward the coast. He shot them and ate them raw. Merrill reached the Arctic Ocean on the 8th day. There he found an old cache of rotten whale meat. Merrill was snowblind and too weak to go on, so he stayed and ate the meat. After 2 days, he heard airplanes overhead. He waved until he was exhausted, then collapsed in despair because they had missed him. However, within minutes, he heard the unmistakable whine of sled runners and the panting of dogs. Bravely, he called out to the musher.
What are the chances of bumming a ride to Barrow?
Playing the game, trapper John Hegness replied, "Sorry, but I've got a full load." Then he easily lifted the emaciated, barely alive man into his sled. Merrill was still clinging to his cup of rice. Merrill took weeks to recover. He was starving and sick with tularemia or Rocky Mountain fever. Aviation safety became a major issue with Merrill after that crash. Anchorage Air Transport carried 120 pounds of survival gear on their flights. Despite narrow escapes, Merrill convinced insurance companies that
Alaska boasts a record of no deaths, no passengers or pilots of any aircraft in the territory. A newspaper reporter at Fairbanks once walked into a propeller and was killed. But this is the only death directly or indirectly chargeable to aviation up here, as far as I know.
He designed better landing gear for the constantly changing airfield conditions. Along with Alonzo Cope, he decided to combine wheels and skis called skeel so aircraft could operate from either snow-covered or cleared airfields. Business was booming. Post-World War I prosperity brought big game hunters to Alaska willing to pay a lot of money for their adventures. It was clear that Anchorage needed a better airport with an increasing number of flights in and out of the city. A 35-acre site a mile east of the city was selected, and on August 22, 1929, the Anchorage Municipal Airport was completed. It consisted of 2 dirt and gravel runways and a wind cone. September 16, 1929 was a normal day for Russell Merrill. He flew hunters from Anchorage to the Kenai Peninsula and then from Anchorage to Rainy Pass. Later that afternoon, he left Anchorage for Bethel, but never made it. Ben Eielson, Harvey Barnell, Alonzo Cope, and Joe Crossan flew the skies for weeks searching for him. Villagers and trappers conducted ground searches by dog team and by boat. Merrill's plane and his body were never found. In the summer of 1930, Anchorage Municipal Airport was renamed Merrill Airport. A tower and light beacon became a memorial to Russell Merrill. This would light the way for all of Alaska's pilots that would follow him.
I hurry to my blue heaven. I turn to the right, a little white light will lead you to my blue